Right now we're going to talk about casting. Casting is a process where you melt metal and force it into a mold. The essential questions are, why is knowledge of safety so critical in the casting process? And list the parts of the casting process and describe why each step is critical. Casting is a great way to get more of a 3D piece, and it is a great way to get texture. You need to be careful, however, because any fingerprints that show in the wax will also show up in your finished piece. There are numerous steps, and we're going to talk about each step here before we look at some examples. Then we will go into each of the processes individually because they are all very in-depth. The first step is the wax model. The first time you create a casting, we will be creating a ring so that we are all on the same page when it comes to how to create a model. The model will be placed in a flask, which you can see on the left. Step 2 is creating investment. Investment is like plaster that you pour around the mold in order to create the space where the metal will eventually flow into. Step 3 is wait time. After you invest, you have to wait 2 days before you can actually fire the piece in the kiln. It's your responsibility to make sure that you are available when your piece will be cast. So if you finish your investment and you know you will not be in class 2 days after you're investing, you need to speak with your instructor. Step 4 is burnout, casting, and cleanup. During the burnout, we put the piece in the kiln and all of the wax melts away from where it was in the flask. You then have a hole where the metal will actually fill into. Once the piece is cast, you have to clean it up. The 5th step is actually finishing your piece, creating that high shine on your piece. Some working tips for casting are things like wax saw blades, using dental tools, using wax files and regular files, as well as sandpaper and possibly wax burrs with a Dremel tool. As you're carving, you will be able to create texture with a tool onto the surface of your mold. Once your model is finished, you need to carve out parts of the design so that the piece is hollow enough that you won't have to pay an exorbitant amount. You can see the hollowing the best in the example on the left. You can also use sheet wax and wax wires to create your model. When you attach pieces of wax to the model, you will have to use an alcohol lamp. You need to make sure that you're careful with the open flame so that you don't burn yourself or others. Before you can cast, you will have to connect something called a sprue. It's a piece of wax wire that you attach to your model that looks like how a tree connects to the ground. You do need to be careful when you create your sprue so that you don't accidentally create areas that cut off the flow of metal so that your cast is successful. There are different ways of sprueing your piece in order to be successful. You need to make sure that you are paying attention to the correct and incorrect ways so that your model actually becomes metal. Before you can invest your piece, you do have to weigh it and create calculations in order to convert the amount of metal that you need to replace the amount of wax. Because wax is lighter than metal, we have to do those calculations. Again, there will be a 2-day wait time between when you are able to invest and when the piece is placed in the kiln in order to cast your piece. After the piece comes out of the kiln, you'll put it in the centrifuge and actually heat up the metal in order to cast your piece. Once the piece has been quenched, you can remove the sprue from the piece with a jeweler's saw. The requirements for the cast piece are that you'll have 3D areas of form, meaning that you'll have the X, Y, and Z axes, meaning that you will have parts of the piece in each direction, the X, Y, and Z axes in space. You should also have positive and negative spaces in your design, as well as textured areas and smooth areas. And notice that in the smooth areas, you should have a high shine where there are no scratches. Now we're ready to go and look at some examples before we get more in depth in each of the steps of the process.